Open up, Merrick. Got a gift for you. The pounding on the cabin door echoed through the pine forest at dawn. Jonah Merrick wiped the sweat from his brow, his axe still buried in a log, and frowned. No one climbed this high unless they wanted trouble. When he opened the door, the sheriff stood there, broad, smug, the kind of man who carried power like a weapon. Beside him, a deputy held the arm of a woman in torn, filthy clothes. Her wrists were bruised from shackles, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. "This one's yours now," Sheriff Silas Crow said, shoving her forward. "Caught her stealing from the good people of Redemption Falls. Town don't want her, and I sure as hell ain't feeding her in my jail any longer." The woman stumbled, falling hard onto the dirt. She tried to speak, but her lips were too dry. Jonah scowled. "You're dumping prisoners at my door now?" Crow smirked, tossing a small iron key into the mud. "You live alone up here. Figure you could use company. Or labor. Or both. Either way, she's your problem now." And with that, the sheriff climbed into his wagon and rode away, laughter fading down the trail. Jonah stood there, jaw tight, watching dust rise behind the wagon wheels. Then he looked down at the woman, at the blood on her wrists, the dirt in her tangled hair, the quiet defiance still burning in her eyes. He sighed, picked up the key, and knelt beside her. "You can stop shaking," he said, voice low but steady. "You're safe here." For the first time in weeks, Eva Blackwell let herself believe it might be true. Eva might finally be safe, but her story is just beginning. Quick question for you before we continue. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment and let me know. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to support the channel. All right, let's head back inside the cabin. Eva Blackwell had once been known in Redemption Falls as the kind girl from the bakery, the one who always slipped extra sugar rolls into a child's paper bag, or helped a miner's wife carry flour home when the wind turned cruel. But kindness in towns like Redemption Falls was a fragile thing. It couldn't survive greed. Gertrude Hawkins, the bakery's owner, had been drowning in gambling debts. When her creditors came calling, she'd needed someone to take the fall. And who better than the soft-hearted, soft-bodied girl the town already whispered about? Fat, slow, and foolish, they'd said behind Eva's back. Wouldn't surprise me if she's got sticky fingers, too. So when the sheriff came knocking, nobody spoke up for her. They watched from their porches as she was dragged through the dust, her wrists bound, her tears catching the morning sun. In the cramped, rancid jail cell, Sheriff Crow made sure her humiliation was complete. He threw her scraps instead of meals, let drunks mock her through the bars, and sneered every time she begged to tell her side. "You think anyone's gonna believe you over a respectable lady like Hawkins?" he said with a grin. "You're just a fat thief. You're lucky I don't hang you myself." 2 weeks later, when the sheriff's wagon rattled away from the jail with her chained in the back, Eva thought she was being taken to the gallows. But the road twisted higher into the mountains, where the air grew cold and thin. Now, standing in Jonah Merrick's cabin, free of her shackles but trembling still, she didn't know whether to feel relief or fear. The man before her looked nothing like the men she'd known. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar tracing the line of his jaw and eyes the color of wet earth after rain. His voice was rough, but not cruel. "You got a name?" he asked. "Eva," she whispered. "Eva Blackwell." He nodded slowly. "Jonah Merrick. And you're not staying here as a prisoner, you understand?" She blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "I know Crow," he continued. "He's a liar and a snake. He's dumped folks up here before when he wanted them gone." He poured her a tin cup of water, slid it toward her. "Drink, then you'll tell me everything." That night, while the wind howled outside, Eva told him her story. About the missing money, the false accusation, the laughter of the townsfolk as she was led away. Jonah listened without interrupting, his hands still and his gaze steady. When she finally ran out of words, he said quietly, "You didn't deserve any of that." He handed her a bowl of stew, steaming and rich with herbs, the first real meal she'd had in weeks. Eva wanted to cry, not from sadness this time, but from something she hadn't felt in months. Safety. As she ate, Jonah rose to stoke the fire. "You can stay in the spare room," he said. "It's small, but it's warm. No locks, no chains." She looked at him then, really looked, at the tired kindness in his face, at the man the sheriff had called a recluse, half mad. Maybe, she thought, the only madmen in this world were the ones who called kindness weakness. Outside, snow began to fall over the pines. Inside, for the first time in a long while, Eva slept without fear. The next morning, the mountains shimmered under a thin veil of snow. Eva awoke to the smell of coffee and the soft crackle of firewood. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until she saw Jonah sitting by the stove, sharpening his knife with slow, even strokes. He looked up when she stirred. "There's bread and coffee. Help yourself." His voice carried no command, only calm. Still, Eva hesitated before taking a seat at the table. The simple kindness, being offered breakfast instead of orders, felt strange. "You don't have to feed me," she murmured. Jonah shrugged. "You're here. Everyone eats under this roof." They spent the morning in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Jonah mended a trap line while Eva, still weak but restless, tried to tidy the small cabin. When she reached for the broom, he frowned. "You don't owe me work." "I know," she said softly, "but I need to do something. It helps me forget." He nodded once, understanding. Days passed. The rhythm of life on the mountain took hold, quiet, steady, honest. Jonah hunted and split firewood, while Eva cooked, sewed, and cleaned. She began to hum as she worked, a sound that filled the cabin with something long absent, warmth. At first she kept her distance. He was a stranger, after all, a man who spoke little and carried the weight of old pain in his eyes. But as snow deepened around them, isolation became a kind of grace. Jonah taught her how to start a fire with flint and dry moss. She, in turn, baked bread that made him pause mid-bite and smile faintly. "Haven't tasted anything like this since my mother's kitchen," he said. One afternoon, when the wind screamed outside and the fire burned low, Eva asked, "Why did you let me stay? The sheriff could come back." Jonah's gaze flickered to the flames. "I don't take orders from cowards. Crow's the kind of man who preys on the weak. I spent too many years following men like him during the war." He paused, jaw tightening. "I learned that doing nothing can make you just as guilty." Eva watched him in silence. His words carried the weight of someone who'd seen death and shame and still chosen decency. Later, while gathering wood, she slipped on the icy steps. Jonah caught her before she fell, his hands strong around her arms. For a heartbeat, they froze, his breath brushing her hair, her pulse quick beneath his fingers. "I'm fine," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice lower now, but he didn't move away right away, and neither did she. When he finally let go, something unspoken lingered in the air, something fragile but alive. Over the next few weeks, their silence grew comfortable. They shared meals, stories, even laughter. Eva began reading aloud from an old book Jonah kept on the shelf, The Pilgrim's Progress, her voice soft but sure.
Jonah would listen with his eyes half closed, as though the words soothed something raw inside him. One evening she found him outside under the stars, staring toward the valley lights far below. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The town?" He chuckled. "No. The noise, the lies, I left all that behind." Then, after a pause, "But I miss people who weren't afraid to do what's right. There aren't many of them left."
Eva looked at him, the snow light glinting off his hair. "Maybe there's more than you think," she said quietly. Jonah turned to her then, studying her face, the courage behind the softness, the strength beneath the scars left by cruelty. "Maybe," he agreed. That night, as the wind howled through the trees, Eva lay awake in her bed, listening to the fire crackle in the next room. For the first time in months, her fear of tomorrow had been replaced by something else. Hope. And somewhere beyond the walls, Jonah sat awake too, staring into the flames, wondering how a woman the world had thrown away could make a broken man feel alive again. Winter settled deep into the mountains. Snow blanketed the world in white silence, and the days bled into one another, gray dawns, golden fires, and long, quiet evenings. Yet inside Jonah Merrick's cabin, life began to take on a rhythm that neither he nor Eva had expected. Each morning, Jonah left early to check his traps, and Eva would stoke the fire, boil coffee, and tidy the home that was no longer strange to her. When he returned, shaking snow from his coat, there would always be warmth waiting, a meal on the stove, and a woman with tired hands but bright eyes. They didn't speak much, not at first. Words weren't Jonah's way. He'd lived alone for years, his voice reserved for the wind and his axe. But Eva changed that. One morning, as he brought in firewood, he stopped in the doorway. She was singing, softly, almost to herself, while kneading bread dough. The tune was simple and sorrowful, something old and beautiful. "I used to sing to keep the mornings from feeling so long." He nodded, setting the firewood down. "Keep singing. Makes this place feel less empty." After that, she sang often, while cooking, while sweeping, while sewing the tears in his shirts. The cabin that had once echoed with nothing but silence now carried warmth, life, and laughter. Eva had started a small garden indoors near the window, sprouting herbs and onions in wooden boxes. Jonah teased her about it at first. "You really think those'll grow in this cold?" "They'll grow if someone believes they can," she replied, giving him a look that made him fall quiet. She worked hard, and he saw the quiet pride in her every act, how she measured flour precisely, how she folded laundry neatly, how she hummed when she thought no one was listening. Jonah had lived in a world of violence, but Eva moved through his home with gentleness so steady it began to undo the hardness inside him. One afternoon she tried to chop firewood. Jonah found her struggling with the axe, her breath fogging in the cold. "You're going to hurt yourself," he said, walking over. "I can learn," she protested. "I don't doubt that," he replied, taking the axe from her hands. "But you don't start with oak." He showed her how to hold it, how to find the grain, how to let gravity do the work. She tried again, the axe biting into the log with a satisfying crack. She looked up at him, triumphant. He grinned. "Told you. You just needed the right swing." That evening he found her sitting by the fire, rubbing her sore hands. He placed a jar of ointment on the table. "Use that," he said. She blinked. "Where did you—" "Made it myself. Pine resin and tallow. Works better than anything from town." She smiled softly. "Thank you, Jonah." He nodded, sitting across from her. The firelight danced between them,
painting his face in gold and shadow.
There was something in his gaze that made her heart stutter, a quiet depth she'd never seen in any man before. Later, as snow fell thick outside, they shared stew and talked about their pasts, about the cruelty of the world beyond the mountains. "I used to think being alone was peace," Jonah said, "but it was just survival. You brought life back here, Eva." She met his eyes. "You gave me back my dignity. That's something I thought was gone forever." He looked down, swallowing hard. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes it mean something." Outside, the storm raged. Inside, two broken souls sat close to the fire, no longer broken, but quietly rebuilding. By the end of winter, the cabin no longer felt like Jonah's, it felt like theirs. When the first signs of spring touched the mountains, Eva stepped outside one morning to find crocuses pushing through the snow. She called Jonah to look, her laughter echoing through the valley. He stood beside her, watching the light in her face. And for the first time in years, Jonah Merrick, once called the madman of the mountains, felt something stronger than solitude. He felt home. Spring brought life back to the mountain, and with it, shadows from the valley below. For weeks, Jonah and Eva had lived in peace, tending to their small world of wood smoke, laughter, and quiet work. But peace, as Jonah often said, never lasted long when men like Sheriff Crow drew breath. It began one morning when Jonah returned from the trading post earlier than usual. His face was tense, his jaw set. "Crow's been asking questions," he said. "Said he heard I've been keeping company up here. A woman." Eva froze, her hands still in the soapy water by the sink. "He's coming back?" Jonah nodded slowly. "Soon. And he's bringing men with him." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, thick, heavy, the kind that pressed against the chest. Eva turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "He'll say I ran away, that I broke some law. He'll drag me back." Jonah stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "He won't take you, not while I'm standing." But even as he said it, his mind turned to the risk. Crow wasn't just after revenge. He wanted the mountain itself. Jonah's land had once been worthless, rocky, and remote, until word spread that there was silver in the cliffs. Crow had been trying for months to force him to sell. Dumping Eva here had been more than cruelty, it was part of a plan. If Jonah harbored a fugitive, Crow could seize the property legally. Jonah's eyes darkened. That bastard knew exactly what he was doing. Eva looked up, guilt flashing in her eyes. "Then I should go. If I stay, he'll come for you." He slammed his hand against the table, not in anger at her, but at the injustice of it all. "You think I care about the land more than you?" She flinched. Jonah immediately softened his tone. "Eva, I've lived alone most of my life. This place means something because you're here. I won't let him take that away." That night, as wind rustled through the pines, Jonah began preparing. He checked his rifle, sharpened his knife, and reinforced the door. Eva helped quietly, rolling cartridges with trembling hands. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate that he can twist the truth and everyone believes him." Jonah paused, glancing toward her. "Truth has a way of surviving liars," he said. "Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to speak it." The next morning, a horse's neigh echoed down the trail. Dust rose on the horizon, 3 riders. Jonah's expression turned to stone. He met them outside the cabin. Sheriff Crow dismounted first, smug as ever, his spurs jangling like laughter. "Morning, Merrick. You've been harboring stolen property." He tilted his hat toward Eva, who stood in the doorway. "That woman belongs to the county." "She belongs to no one,"
Jonah said coldly.
Crow smiled, but there was venom behind it. "You're obstructing justice. That's a hanging offense."
Jonah leveled his rifle, steady and silent. "Then you best start building 2 gallows, Sheriff." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then a voice broke the stillness, firm, clear, and unexpected. "She's no fugitive." A rider appeared behind them, waving a folded document. It was Marcus Whitfield, the traveling lawyer Eva had once confided in. He dismounted and handed Crow a letter sealed with the county crest. "Judge Hollister has reopened her case. She's been declared innocent. You, Sheriff, are under investigation for unlawful imprisonment and corruption." Crow's smirk faltered. "You've got no proof." Whitfield stepped aside, revealing another witness, an older woman, trembling but resolute. It was Mrs. Carter, the baker's assistant, who had seen Gertrude Hawkins steal the money. Crow's face turned red.
"You think a judge in Carson City cares what some mountain hermit says?" Jonah lowered his rifle just slightly. "He will when he hears what's buried in those ledgers you kept from the miners. Whitfield's got copies. You're finished, Crow." For a long moment, the sheriff said nothing. Then, with a snarl, he mounted his horse and spat into the dirt. "This ain't over." Jonah's gaze was unflinching. "It is for you." When the sound of hoofbeats faded into the trees, Ava sank to her knees, shaking. Jonah knelt beside her, his calloused hand closing over hers. "It's over," he said softly. "You're free." But even as the words left his lips, they both knew freedom would come with a choice neither had dared to face. What came next? For a few days after the confrontation, the mountains seemed to exhale in peace again. But Jonah knew better than to trust quiet when a man like Sheriff Crow had been humiliated. Corrupt men didn't disappear. They struck when pride turned to rage. 3 nights later, the attack came. The first gunshots shattered the stillness. Jonah was on his feet before the echo faded, pulling Ava to the floor. A lantern toppled, spilling light across the wooden walls. Through the window he saw movement. 3 figures creeping through the trees, torches flaring. Crow had come back, drunk on vengeance. Jonah grabbed his rifle and whispered, "Stay down. Don't move till I tell you." But Ava's heart pounded too loud to obey. She watched him step out into the storm of snow and smoke, his silhouette outlined by firelight. The sheriff's voice boomed from the dark. "Come out, Merrick. You think you can make a fool of me? You and your whore both gonna burn tonight." Jonah's eyes narrowed. "You already made a fool of yourself, Crow. Now you're just making it official." Gunfire cracked. Jonah dove behind a log, returning fire with calm precision. He moved like a soldier again, efficient, silent, deadly. 2 of Crow's men went down in seconds, but a bullet grazed Jonah's arm, spinning him back against the door. Inside, Eva clutched the rifle he'd kept above the hearth. She'd never fired one before, but she'd watched him enough times to know. When a shadow crossed the window, the sheriff himself, she didn't think, she acted. The shot rang out, splitting the night. Crow fell backward into the snow, his torch extinguished beside him. When the smoke cleared, Jonah turned toward her, stunned. She stood trembling in the doorway, rifle shaking in her hands, tears streaking her face. I didn't mean to." He crossed the space in 2 strides, taking the weapon gently from her grasp. "You did what you had to. It's over." The fire outside sputtered and died. Snow fell softly over the wreckage, covering the blood, washing away the noise. Jonah knelt beside Crow's body, his jaw set in grim silence. Then he looked back at Eva, the woman who'd been thrown to the wolves and had learned to stand beside one.
When dawn came, the judge's men arrived from town, summoned by Whitfield's word. They took Crow's body and cleared Jonah of any charge. For once, justice came without a price. That night, Eva and Jonah sat by the hearth, wrapped in the hush that follows survival. His arm was bandaged, her hands still trembling, but between them, something unspoken had become undeniable. Jonah looked at her and said quietly, "You could go anywhere now. Start fresh. Be free." Eva shook her head, tears glinting in the firelight. "I already am free, because I'm home." Jonah's rough fingers brushed against hers, and for the first time in years, he let himself smile. Outside, the wind sighed through the pines, not in warning, but in peace. The days that followed were calm in a way neither of them had ever known.
The mountain, once a place of exile and fear, became a refuge, a world of whispering pines, crackling fires, and quiet companionship. Jonah's arm healed slowly, bound with linen and pine sap, and though Eva scolded him for trying to chop wood too soon, he only laughed. A sound she realized she'd never heard from him before. It was deep and warm, like the first note of a hymn. Every evening they shared dinner by the fire. Sometimes they spoke about the past, about the people they'd been before the world broke them, and sometimes they didn't. Silence in their home was no longer heavy. It was comfortable, a kind of language that only they understood. One night, as snow began to fall again outside, Jonah set down his mug and looked at her across the flickering light. "I've lived a long time thinking solitude was the only peace left for a man like me," he said quietly. "But when Crow left you here, when I saw you standing in my doorway, scared and proud and alive, I realized peace was never the same as loneliness." Eva's eyes glistened. "And I thought kindness was something I'd never see again, until you opened that door." He reached across the table, rough fingers brushing against hers. "You're safe here," he murmured. "If you'll have it, this is your home." Tears slipped down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but release. "I already have it," she whispered, "and I'll never leave." Outside, the mountain wind softened, carrying with it the scent of pine and promise. Inside the cabin, two hearts, once condemned and cast aside, found the one thing neither had dared hope for: a place to belong, a place called home. Stories like Eva and Jonah's remind us that even the cruelest hands of fate can place us exactly where we're meant to be. She was abandoned, branded a criminal, and thrown into the wilderness. Yet the very cruelty meant to destroy her led her to love, safety, and dignity. Maybe that's what true redemption looks like. Not being rescued by the world, but finding someone who helps you rebuild your own. If you're hearing this tonight, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? And if you still believe in second chances, stay close. The next story is for you.